Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Japan Lens. I'm here today with Mr. Glen S. Fukushima, who we are so happy to welcome to the show again. Mr. Fukushima is a third-generation American of Japanese ancestry from the state of California, who attended college at Deep Springs and Stanford University. He did his graduate studies at Harvard University and was an exchange student at Japan's Keio University. He was also a Fulbright Fellow at Japan's most prestigious institution of higher learning, the University of Tokyo. One of the most prolific subject matter experts on Japan, Mr. Fukushima has been engaged in U.S.-Japan relations since the 1970s. He has served in a variety of roles, one of the most notable being Deputy Assistant U.S. Trade Representative for Japan and China. He was also elected twice to serve as president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. Mr. Fukushima was tapped by President Joe Biden to serve as vice chair of the Securities Investor Protection Corporation and has served in that capacity since 2022. Mr. Fukushima is also a Distinguished Career Institute Fellow at Stanford University and a Senior Fellow at the Center for American Progress. He possesses bilingual fluency in Japanese and is often invited to appear on Japanese news shows to share his deep knowledge of the U.S.-Japan relationship. Glenn, thank you so much for being on the show again.
Well, thank you for the invitation and for the very generous introduction.
Oh, so happy to have you. Speaking of Japanese news shows, you've been making various appearances, especially on Japanese news shows that are interested in your perspective on the U.S.-Japan relationship. So I wonder, what types of questions or concerns about the United States are you hearing from Japanese these days?
Sure. So I was in Japan until early part of June, and I appeared on a Japanese television news program and also in several study groups, breakfast meetings, dinner meetings with Japanese business people, political people, bureaucrats, and so forth. And then just last week, I was in New York City, and I was asked to give a talk in Japanese to a group of Japanese business leaders. And I guess in general, there are four areas that seem to be of interest among the people I speak with in Japan. The first topic, and this is directly related to the visit that Prime Minister Takaichi made to Washington, D.C., I guess it was March 19th, about China. And because that trip, as you know, was originally planned thinking that President Trump would be going to China at the end of March, early April. And so that trip by the Prime Minister was timed. They were hoping that she would have the opportunity to discuss with him Japan's view of China just before he leaves for China, and also because of the comment that she made in the Diet November 7th of last year, which kind of triggered a lot of the actions that China has taken towards Japan over the last several months. But anyway, so China is certainly a major item of interest. And part of it is obviously what was discussed and agreed to between the president and President Xi in China in when he visited in, I guess it was May. But also the September 24th meeting that is supposed to take place between President Xi and President Trump when Xi visits Washington in September. So that whole area of China and especially Taiwan is an area of interest. And the second area of interest, I'd say, is on security cooperation between the U.S. and Japan. And, you know, you're very expert on the subject, but clearly the defense expenditure increase in Japan, increasing of arms purchases by Japan, also recently lifting restrictions on exporting arms from Japan. And there's a real interest. I've been having discussion just in the last several days with people in Silicon Valley about the really growing interest in Japan in dual-use technology in Silicon Valley. And I assume that before too long, there's going to be discussions about host nation support. And so that host nation support discussion, as well as this whole issue of the fact that the Takaichi government continuing, well, as you know, the Kishida government decided on the 2% GDP defense expenditure, and then the Takaichi government has accelerated that, the implementation of that, and then there's now talk about, some in the U.S. saying that 2% is not enough, that 3.5% or more may be more appropriate. So that whole area of defense is a second area. And then the third area of interest is the economic side, the $550 billion investment agreement, and also the tariff issue, at least for now, seems to be on the back burner, in the sense that the Akazawa meetings in Washington resulted in the auto tariffs being lowered from 25 to 15%, and the rice import quota, the minimum access, not being changed. And so that's the economic side. Then the fourth issue is the midterm elections, which are coming up on November 3rd. And there's a lot of interest in Japan on what will the result of the midterm elections be, and how could that impact the final 2 years of the Trump administration. So those are the four areas that I get the most questions about.
I see. So you mentioned the diplomacy in China, and but also recently we've had the G7 summit. I wonder, of these big recent diplomatic events, what has stood out for you?
Yes. So from the standpoint of the Trump-Xi summit, I think it was a little. The results were kind of underwhelming, in the sense that, people were expecting some major announcement to come out of that. Certainly, what Trump wanted was expanded economic ties. I think what he wanted to do was to basically have China commit to buying more soybeans, buying hundreds of Boeing jets. I guess he got a commitment of 200, but that was fewer than many had predicted. So this whole area of Trump wanting to show that he is on good terms with Xi Jinping, that he's respected in China, that he was able to get concessions from China that will benefit the U.S. economically and benefit U.S. workers, especially with the midterms coming up. So I think that kind of short-term commercial gains was what Trump was hoping to get, and he did get a little bit of that, but not as much as many people had thought. And then on the other hand, on the China side, I think most people were predicting that from Xi Jinping's point of view, that for him the most important long-term strategic issue was Taiwan. And he wanted to get some commitments from President Trump on that. And the outcome appears to be that Trump has said that this issue of the arms exports to Taiwan that have already been approved by the Congress, he is going to consider that. And so, there's some speculation that he may cancel it or cut back on it or delay it. And so that is a area of concern. But I think a lot of the focus now is September 24th, when the next meeting is supposed to take place, that there may be something that comes out of that meeting. So the China part is kind of ongoing, and not yet clear what the final outcome might be before the midterms. And then on the G7, clearly the Iran issue was foremost, I think, on the minds of the G7 members, because Trump, didn't consult with other G7 members before attacking Iran. And then just recently, the results, the 14-point agreement memorandum was made public, but it seems to indicate that the United States really got much less than what Trump claims the U.S. got. And, there's considerable criticism, not only among Democrats, but even among some Republicans, that what Trump ended up getting so far from Iran gives basically Iran a lot of money and also allows them to sell oil and do a lot of things that, and the thing that the U.S. Presumably gets in return is that the ships can pass through the Hormuz Strait. Mm-hmm. But even that is a 60-day period. And after that, not clear exactly what might happen. Mm-hmm. So I think there's the Iran issue is one that I think the G7 is very watching very closely and concerned about, because the economic impact, especially on Asia, of the Hormuz Strait being closed off is pretty significant. Mm-hmm. And certainly Japan, the Philippines, Korea, Southeast Asia as well. I mean, they are being negatively affected by the reduction in the oil. So yeah, I think that the Iran situation is something that people are watching very closely.
I see. Do you get the sense that, there's been this discussion about the Japanese self-defense forces might send mine-sweeping vessels to the Strait of Hormuz. But I wonder, there seems to be this kind of like dichotomy where the Takaichi administration avoids, condemning or criticizing or making legal assessments on the action, on the U.S. action against Iran, while also kind of pushing itself as this, champion of the rules-based order. And it seems that those two things could be considered, in conflict, since, by some interpretations, the attack on Iran was a violation of international law. So I wonder, in your conversations with well-placed Japanese individuals, are you finding that they have moral concerns about the attack on Iran, or is it very much like a realpolitik, pragmatic approach to this issue? What's your sense of that?
Now, my impression, there's a lot of honne tatemai going on. The honne being that there is concern that the attack could be considered illegal under international law. Mm-hmm. And I think there are some in Japan who do agree with many European countries that there was a violation of international law in this action. At the same time, because Japan is so dependent on the United States, politically, militarily, economically, that Japan is not in a position to publicly criticize the U.S. And also because I think Prime Minister Takaichi, she wants to be seen as the protege of Prime Minister Abe and kind of representing the kind of realistic foreign policy school in Japan. And therefore, I think she wants to be seen as being closely allied with President Trump and the United States. And so what she least wants to do is to show that there's any daylight between the U.S. and Japan, in part because of the China situation. And so I think it is true that, many people in Japan privately are very conscious and very aware that Japan could be liable to the criticism that it is, cozying up too closely to the United States. But they realize that as a realistic matter, there isn't, too much else that Japan can do. It doesn't. Well, it's interesting. I remember that before Prime Minister Takaichi left Japan for the United States, former Prime Minister Ishiba was interviewed on a TV program in which he said, well, the first thing the prime minister should do is tell the president that this attack on Iran was illegal under international law. Um, well, I think it's easy for foreign prime minister Shiba to say that, but as a realistic matter, it's not. I don't think, in the cards.
Right, right. And you mentioned, especially in the context of security, when uh, the tensions in the Taiwan Strait seem to be rising. Um, so, given that, any kind of conflict in that area is very likely to draw in Japan in some way, shape, or form, what would you advise to defense stakeholders or defense officials in Japan, either at the Kante or the Ministry of Defense, in light of this kind of notable shift in U.S. policy vis-a-vis Taiwan?
Well, I'm not in a position of advising the Japanese government on these issues, but I think that as a general principle, it's always good for um, at multiple levels and in multiple forums for Japan and the U.S. to have discussions to try to be as closely aligned as possible. So what I'm thinking about is obviously on the prime minister to president level, that's true, but on the level of Diet members and American members of Congress
Mhm.
and government officials, as well as the business sector, the academic sector. I think on those multiple sectors, as well as multiple levels, I think it's very important for the U.S. and Japan to constantly be in touch with each other uh, on various issues, but especially regarding China, because
Mhm.
I think the China issue is always a ongoing issue of sensitivity. And clearly, I mean, the Chinese are also very adept at finding ways to try to um, divide and conquer
Mhm.
and to try to find ways in which to get the U.S. and Japan to differ on issues. And so um, I think in order to assure that doesn't succeed, I think the U.S. Japan need to constantly be in contact with each other and constantly compare notes and when appropriate, have some joint actions.
Mhm. I see. This discussion you referred to earlier about not just stopping the defense spending at 2% of GDP, but actually bumping it up to perhaps 3.5%. In the greater economic picture of what is going on in Japan right now, do you think that that's a feasible option for the government of Japan, or is that kind of a bridge too far, in your opinion?
Well, I'm not sure because I think that some people in Japan actually would find that that is something uh, they actually would be in favor of, but they don't feel that they on their own can uh, be out front advocating that. And therefore, I think some people in Japan actually find it useful to have some people like Elbridge Colby,
Hmm.
Undersecretary of Defense,
Hmm.
say, well, 2%, that may not be enough. Maybe 3.5% makes more sense.
Hmm.
Now, some people in Japan will say, well, that's just, out of the question because even 2% is a stretch given the budgetary constraints in Japan and so forth. So, um, uh, finding the funds, if there's going to be tax increases or how they're going to fund even 2% is a subject of some debate in Japan. So if that were to go to 3.5, that would clearly create huge, huge discussions within Japan about the wisdom of it, the necessity of it, and if they do decide to do it, then where does the money come from, and what is it going to be used for? And so it is a huge issue, but I think there are some people in Japan who kind of welcome pressure from the United States because they can basically say, well, it's our most important ally, most important partner and ally and protector of Japan, that's saying that, unless we really increase our capabilities, they may not be as reliable as we would like.
Mhm.
So it's a very complicated situation where it's not clearly a black or white situation where all people in Japan would find such a demand or request to be unwelcome.
Mm.
I think some actually, find it to be useful for their own purposes. Um, I mean, I think the nuclear issue, weapons issue, is also a similar one, which is very very complicated one where
Mhm.
there are some in Japan who believe that this is a viable
Mhm.
option. I mean, that's still very much in the minority, I think, but there are a lot of people who believe there should be a vigorous uh, debate in Japan about uh, Japan's uh, the wisdom of Japan having nuclear capability, and
Mhm.
so that's another issue that I expect is going to be more of an issue of discussion.
Yeah, which is in itself incredible because, um, just a few years ago when former Prime Minister Abe brought it up, it was this firestorm of a reaction to that. But shortly before his untimely death, now it's they're talking about it in the news. Almost, it's just like a mainstream topic now.
Yeah, I remember it was it what 15 or 20 years ago, Nakagawa, the member of the Diet from Hokkaido, he mentioned that he felt that Japan should have a discussion debate about nuclear weapons, and that
Mm.
itself was really, got a lot of pushback, a lot of criticism. Even to mention that should have a debate was an issue of controversy.
Mm.
But I guess it was last fall, that uh, Japanese news agencies reported that there was a certain person in the prime minister's office in charge of security issues who said, in a supposedly off the record meeting with Japanese journalists, that he himself personally thought Japan should possess nuclear weapons. And so that was uh, reported in the media,
Mhm.
but neither the prime minister nor the um, chief cabinet secretary criticized or penalized that person, nor was that person removed from the position. So
Mhm.
I think
Mhm.
that kind of gave the signal that um, I don't know that that was necessarily a trial balloon. There's some controversy about that. I mean, some people do claim that that was a trial balloon. Others say no, it was really kind of unintended.
Mm.
Which what I found really funny was that um, after that event, um, I said, wasn't that meeting supposed to be off the record? And some Japanese senior journalist said to me, "Well, you have to understand, in Japan, there's on the record, off the record, and kanzen off the record." And these people were saying that clearly the person who was being interviewed thought he was off the record. He didn't. He should have said it should be kanzen off the record, completely, absolutely off the record. So, I mean, for me, having been in the U.S. government, usually my understanding was it's on the record, on background, and off the record.
Mhm.
And off the record means that you don't write or talk about it, right? It's only
Right.
for your own information. But in Japan, apparently, according to these senior journalists, there is on the record, off the record, and kanzen off the record.
That's good to know. I didn't know
Yeah.
that. Okay. Um, well, that issue with the nuclear weapons, especially I think in the context when it's being discussed in a lot of op-eds and the like in Japan, it seems to be in the context of can we really count on, the extended nuclear umbrella of the US, especially now that North Korean missiles can reach US targets. And so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out going forward. Um, there used to be a school of thought, I guess, kind of in the vein of like LDP, old veteran politicians like Nikai, who thought that closer ties with China, and primarily through business and through commerce, um, that was the actual way to lower tensions, and that would be it. It was, on the one hand, it doesn't make sense to antagonize Japan's largest trading partner, but it also be like these stronger economic ties uh, would have a virtuous effect on security issues as well. But now we hear, as you know, there's this kind of ice age that's kind of visiting between the two countries now, ever since the comment you referred to earlier from Takaichi during the Dai deliberations. And I hear that in her cabinet or in her administration, there aren't a lot of seasoned China hands. And so I wonder, how do you see Sino-Japanese relations? How do you see the situation as it stands today?
Um, well, when I talk to the business community seems to be quite concerned that they find that the November 7th statement had triggered reactions by China, including restricting certain exports of critical materials, also discouraging tourism to Japan,
Mhm.
reimposing limitations on food imports from Japan. And so the business community is quite concerned. But I think you're right that in the political community, uh, I mean, people will say, well, it used to be that Nikai and Fukuda Yasuo in the
Mhm.
LDP and Yamaguchi of the Komeito were all people who had very close ties with the senior leadership in China,
Mhm.
and they could be kind of back channel routes by which, even when on the government to government level things are tense, that these politicians can play kind of an intermediary role and try to smooth things over. But so yeah, people say now that Fukuyasu, Yamaguchi, and Nikai are no longer playing that role. And I guess Moriyama is the one who is supposed to be the senior LDP politician. I think he's head of the Parliamentarian League between Japan and China, but he apparently is not that active. And now I think that the mood in Japan is so negative about China that I think it's not a plus for politicians to publicly be advocating
Mhm.
um, taking a softer stance towards China.
Mhm.
And I think even people like Hayashi Yoshimasa, who used to be head of the Parliamentarians League and with China, and I mean some people criticize him as being too friendly to China.
Mhm.
And there have been criticism of people like Kono Taro also as
Mhm.
somehow being too close to China. And
Mhm.
so it seems like people are um, there's kind of there's no real positive incentive for politicians to come out to um, express an interest in trying to improve relations with China.
Mhm.
And so I think and in some ways I think Takaichi herself and many people around Takaichi believe that one of the reasons that the LDP was able to win the 316 seats or whatever they got in this landslide victory was in part because Takaichi did take a tough stand towards China. And
Mhm.
so the mood now seems to be, at least among the politicians, that there's more to be gained by being tough on China than by being soft on China.
Mhm.
So although the business, and the other thing too is that although the majority of business people I talk to in Japan are concerned about the situation, there are some people who have actually said to me, well, actually, the Chinese are being very, very pragmatic and very practical about this. And they also realize that Japan is important for China in a variety of respects, including on the economic side. And therefore, they're moderating their reactions towards Japan. They're not doing what they did back during the Senkaku controversy, of boycotting Japanese companies, or even, having huge protests in front of Japanese companies in China and so forth. And so they're very, being very measured in their reactions. And therefore, these people say, the negative impact on Japanese companies really isn't as much as one might have feared. And so it's kind of interesting that there are some who are not that concerned. They feel that the Chinese have to kind of go through their motions of being critical and so forth. And I guess just yesterday there was some announcement of 2 Japanese being arrested or detained in China for allegedly trying to smuggle banned items out of China. But the latter school of thought seems to be that things are under control. Things are not getting out of control, and as time goes along, after several months or maybe a year or two, things will kind of get better again. Is the view that some people in Japan seem to take. Now, if it turns out that Xi Jinping and Donald Trump make some kind of deals that Japan feels left out of, then there may be more of a concern that somehow the G2 is starting to emerge. But at least for now, I don't sense that there's that much of alarm in Japan about China-Japan relations.
I see. Yeah, I wonder if Japanese officials felt that they had to kind of rekindle those back channel ties to China from such a cold start. If, for example, there was, like you said, a deal, and then there was this sense that in Japan that they needed to try to ameliorate tensions with China. I wonder if since those well-worn back channels have laid dormant or even perhaps withered, I wonder how Takaichi administration or any administration within the next couple of years would be able to restart those connections.
Yeah, well, but I think going back to our earlier conversation, I think it's really important for the U.S. and Japan to have constant discussions at every level, as I mentioned before, so that to minimize the possibility that China and the United States will kind of decide to go their own path, and that Japan will be kind of left in the lurch.
Right. I see. I wonder what the sentiment is in the business community in Japan about future prospects with the United States, say within the next 3 to 5 to 10 years. If you watch the Japanese news, there tend to be 3 major stories that get a lot of attention. There's a lot of discussion about increased political violence in the U.S. There's also a lot of discussion about Elon Musk becoming the first trillionaire, even while inequality worsens in the United States. And then there's the discussion of the ever increasing U.S. national debt, which I think stands at about $39 trillion at this point and counting. And that some say that could ruin the U.S. economy in the next 20 years. So I wonder, Glenn, if you were the CEO of a major Japanese corporation, you're watching these news stories and you're considering, whether you should conduct large scale investment in the U.S. What would you do? What would you be thinking given these trends?
I think the United States, despite the 3 issues that you mentioned, I think the U.S. is still, comparatively speaking, a market that is more stable and predictable and growing compared to many other markets. And so, again, it depends on the product and service, but I do think that, the first issue of political violence is one that I don't know that it's really kind of that it would be a long-term problem, or that it would necessarily affect the ability of Japanese companies to do business in the U.S. And the second issue of income inequality is something that, from a long-term perspective, is a problem for the United States. But from the standpoint of companies, well, again, it depends on the product and services. But if the product or service is more kind of B2B, business to business, as opposed to business to consumer, that issue probably won't affect the prospects of sales or revenues in the United States. So I think, I mean, the problems you state are real problems for the U.S. economy and U.S. society. But from the standpoint of Japanese companies, I don't know that they're such huge impediments to doing business. And everything is a matter of, comparison. So if you want to compare the U.S. market to, Europe or Southeast Asia or Latin America, it does depend on the product and services. But comparatively speaking, I think the U.S. still is, relatively safe and stable, predictable, and growing. And so, but the other thing too is, and I think that one of the reasons is that there is interest in Japan about the midterm elections, and even beyond that, in the presidential elections of 2028, there's a lot of concern or a lot of interest in Japan about what's going to happen after Trump, because I've attended several meetings in Japan last time where some Japanese so-called specialists were saying that even if Trump goes, Trumpism will not go. And if J.D. Vance becomes president, then these policies will continue. And so these people were arguing that the current situation is going to be kind of the permanent long-term situation in the U.S., whereas a few others, I would say the others were in the minority, but the majority view that I heard in Japan was they said, no, wait a minute, there's actually a lot of opposition to the fact that Trump has spent so much time on foreign policy issues, contrary to his promises, that he is not paying attention to dealing with inflation, and his actions on tariffs, and also Iran has raised the price of food, the price of gasoline, and there's enough dissatisfaction about Trump that things are likely to change in the U.S. And if a Democratic governor, like a governor of a Democratic from the Democratic Party, were to become president, policies could change rather dramatically, including especially in areas like climate change. So I think the Japanese are looking at the U.S. situation, both the midterms and the presidential election, in part because they want to try to predict how the U.S. market is going to be for Japanese commercial interests.
Is that I know that you're also, in addition to being a Japan expert, you're also very deeply involved in what's going on in U.S. politics. Is that your sense as well, that these, dinner table issues such as more expensive groceries, higher price of gas, that these are becoming big liabilities for the GOP, regardless of who comes after Trump?
Well, the public opinion polls certainly show that the president's approval rating is down to, like, I guess, 36%. And there are some polls that indicate that his handling of the economy, I think there's one poll that shows that only 26% support for his handling of the economy. So certainly, I mean, the Democrats are pretty much critical of Trump. The Republican base is supportive of Trump. So it really depends where the independents are. And the independents are the ones who, I think, in the last election thought that Trump would do a better job of handling the economy than either Biden or Kamala Harris, and that Trump would do a better job of controlling the borders on immigration. And I think it was largely on that basis that the independents voted for Trump.
Mhm.
And so many of those people have been disappointed that Trump is spending so much time on Venezuela and Iran and all these other things that doesn't really put America first. It really takes time and attention away from the domestic issues. And I think so. Those issues of the economy, the so-called affordability issues, and the immigration issue. On the immigration issue, I think there is an appreciation that the borders are more under control now than they were under Biden and Harris. But
Mhm.
the
Mhm.
way in which they're doing this,
Mhm.
all the deportation and all of that, I think some people are concerned that the process by which that's being done is not, it's excessive.
Mhm.
And so there's some criticism of that. And then there's also an issue that I'm not sure how much traction it's going to get, but it's starting to get traction, and that is conflict of interest and corruption.
Mhm.
And I mean, there is increasing evidence, indication of the president and his friends and his relatives um, taking advantage of uh, information that they have being in the government and making personal gains.
Mhm.
And so I think that that is an issue that some people like John Ossoff, the senator
Mhm.
from Georgia, has been focusing a lot on and seems to be gaining some traction. I mean, there are some pundits in the US who say that one of the reasons that Viktor Orban lost in Hungary was this whole issue of corruption and conflict of interest, and that has some relevance to the United States as well. So it'll be interesting to see over the next 5 months as the midterms approach to what extent that's an issue, and also in the 28 elections as well. But so the indications overall, if you look at the public opinion polls, is that the support for the GOP is declining. At the same
Mhm.
time, as you know, because of the redistricting is supposed to be done once every 10 years, but President Trump asked Abbott, the governor of Texas, and the Texas state legislature to redistrict, basically gerrymander, so that 5 seats will be in favor of Republicans, and they did
Mhm.
that. And
Mhm.
so Gavin Newsom, to counter that in California, didn't have the assembly do it, but had the a Proposition 50, in which
Mhm.
the voters of California decided to suspend for the time being the independent commission that does the redistricting, and made it so that 5 seats in California are tilted in favor of Democrats. And then, Florida and some other southern states in particular, and Indiana is a really interesting example, because Indiana, Trump asked the Indiana state legislature to um, redistrict to favor Republicans, and the Republicans opposed that. They didn't do what Trump asked to do, but in the most recent primaries, seven of the or five of the seven Republicans who opposed Trump lost to their opponents in the primaries, and those five were people that Trump was supporting, and so Trump wasn't successful in getting the Indiana state legislature to gerrymander the way he wanted, but he was able to get rid of five of the members of the state legislature who opposed him. And then, and in addition to that issue of gerrymandering that's
Mhm.
going on, and also in Virginia, in Virginia,
Mhm. Mhm.
they did what California did, which is to have a proposition under which there were 4 seats that they made more favorable to Democrats.
Mhm.
But then, really unexpectedly, the Virginia State Supreme Court reversed that, and therefore that went away. And in addition to all that, the Supreme Court has gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965, basically saying that this was a law that may have had some relevance way back, 60 years ago when there was discrimination, but now there's no longer any discrimination. Therefore, we don't have to enforce these and monitor and make sure that blacks have the equal representation. And so that has made, I think, Louisiana, Mississippi, Tennessee, and some other southern states try to redistrict to reduce the power of the black vote and favor Republicans. So there's so much going on. There's so many moving parts right now that it's really difficult to predict what's going to happen overall. Because actually, before all of this gerrymandering stuff was going on, I think many Democrats thought that they could win 30 to 40 seats if there's a blue wave in the House. In 2010, 2 years after Obama became president, the Democrats lost 63 seats in the House. And in 2018, 2 years after Trump became president, I think the Republicans lost 40 seats in the House. And this time, I think Democrats thought that with the blue wave, that 30 to 40 seats they might be able to gain. But now with all this gerrymandering going on, that's not going to happen. But I think still, because of the disapproval rate overall of the president and the Republicans, I think the House is going to go Democratic majority, although not by the huge margin that some people thought. And then the other thing that's interesting is that until last November, I think most people felt that it would be next to impossible for the Senate to go Democratic majority, because in the last election, the Democrats lost, John Tester lost in Montana, Sherrod Brown in Ohio, Bob Casey in Pennsylvania, then Joe Manchin retired in West Virginia. So that meant that 4 seats went to the Republicans, and so 53 to 47 now. And I think most people thought it would be impossible for Democrats to take back the majority in the Senate in the next election. But given the very positive results the Democrats had last November, doing much better than had been expected or had been predicted by the polls, people think that North Carolina will likely go Democratic with Roy Cooper, who's a popular governor who's trying to be senator. And then there are 5 other states: Maine, Ohio, Iowa, Alaska, and Texas. So there are these 6 states where it's difficult to predict what the results are going to be. But of the 6 states, I think some people believe that it might be possible for Democrats to win 4 of those 6 and therefore take the majority back. I personally think the probability of that is still less than 50-50. But depending on what happens between now and November 3rd, it's possible that could happen. So I think right now, most analysts, I believe, think that the House is likely to go Democratic, but not by a huge margin. The Senate, Democrats may be able to take 2 or 3, but not 4. But that could change. But it's kind of in flux, so it's difficult to predict at this point.
I see. Well, that's very insightful. Especially, I think it feels like the gerrymandering issue is considered something of a dark stain on the U.S. right now, and so I wonder if if a Japanese person says, it sounds like there's a lot of doom and gloom out of the U.S. these days. Is there a good news stories about the U.S. that you like to tell Japanese folks who seem overly pessimistic?
Well, when I give my talks recently, in addition to the macro level talks, I do inject some personal observations, in the sense that last September I accepted a position to be a visiting fellow at Stanford. So since last September, I've been spending more time in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, than in Washington, D.C., although I visit Washington a couple of times since September. But I have to say that, being in California, for instance, last August, there was a hearing of the California select committee in the state assembly, select committee on California trade and investment with Asia, and I was asked to testify. And the members of the select committee in California, their view was, they said, well, no, we understand that the U.S. Congress and the administration, well, not Congress, the U.S. administration is imposing tariffs on our trading partners and kind of, really creating a lot of confusion and commotion among our trading partners. But we here in California, we want to find ways to promote trade and investment. And our state has benefited from trade, investment, immigration. And so, tell us how we can promote trade and investment, especially with Asia. So that was very refreshing to know that, that they think that the approach being taken by the Trump administration on trade in particular was not the way they wanted to go, number one. Mm-hmm. Number two, there was the 20th annual Sake Day in San Francisco, Japantown, where on a Saturday afternoon between 3 p.m. and 8 p.m., during a 5-hour period, more than 1,000 people came and enjoyed sake, 34 breweries. And a lot of these people were just, plain Americans who didn't have anything to do with Japan, but they liked sake. And then thirdly, the Young Museum had an exhibition from September of last year to January of this year on the art of manga. And this was, I think, the largest exhibition so far in the United States on manga. It was very, very successful. I think it was extended by a week or two because of the popularity. Also, there was in October of last year a movie, a documentary film, which I supported financially, called Diamond Diplomacy, about the 150-year history of baseball between the U.S. and Japan. And this movie has gotten a lot of positive reviews and positive attention, and especially now with so many Japanese baseball players, doing well in the United States, including Ohtani, Shohei. So that, the whole sports area. So sports, food, manga, trade, these are all things that, being here in California, there's so many positive, constructive things about. And then looking just recently at the California election for governor, I'm encouraged that the person who appears to be, well, he won in the primaries. And so there's Javier Becerra, who had been in the state assembly and then member of the House of Representatives from California, then was Attorney General of California, and then was Secretary of Health and Human Services for President Biden. But Javier Becerra is the Democrat who won. The Hilton, the Republican, came in number 2. But California being a heavily Democratic state, it's most probable that Becerra will become the governor. But he's a very pragmatic, realistic guy who values trade, investment, and he, I think his parents immigrated from Mexico, so he's, he wants to have a solid immigration policy, and so being in California, I'm very encouraged by the situation here, and California is the harbinger of the future for the United States. I think what happens in California often is what the rest of the country ends up doing 20 or 30 years later. Many of the things in California are, I think California is really a leader, a pioneer in many respects. So I guess, to answer your question, being here in California, I feel that this is kind of the future, right? And when I'm in Washington, D.C., I think of, Biden and Trump, although obviously they have very different policies on a number of issues like climate change, they're basically old white men from the East Coast who experienced the Cold War, and they look at Europe as the land from which the U.S. originated. And so it's a totally different environment being here in California, where I think the leaders are younger by and large, and it's not the Cold War. I mean, the Cold War, in many respects, I think both Biden and Trump, I mean, they think, Biden, he said, the world is divided in terms of democracy versus autocracy. Well, that's really pretty unrealistic. I mean, there are a lot of countries out there, including the global South, who don't want to be that they're fully aligned with the U.S. or with China, so I think that kind of partly is generational, partly is regional. But I being in Washington, D.C., I really felt the last several years that from 2016 on, that the U.S. was just too focused on the Atlantic and too focused on the past and too focused on a black and white view of the world. And I think California, because now California with 40 million people is not only the largest state in the country, but also the GDP of California is now number 4 in the world. Last year, it surpassed Japan. So after the U.S. and China and Germany, California is now the number 4 GDP in the world. And the way it got there was largely as a result of trade, investment, immigration, and emphasis investment on education. And, California has one of the best public university system in the country. And so many of the entrepreneurs in Silicon Valley are people who came from other countries. And so there's a appreciation of what immigrants can provide. And so you have a state where agriculture in the inner part of the state is a huge source of business. And then there's the Silicon Valley and the technology in the north. There's also biotech and technology in the south, as well as Hollywood and soft power. And so, to me, being in California, I'm very optimistic. So that's what I tell my Japanese friends. I say, look at California. It's kind of the future, not Washington and the older generation who only look at the internal workings of Washington.
What a great message to convey. I asked you for a good news story, and you did me one better. You gave me six or seven, so that's really great. What will you? I know that you mentioned the upcoming midterms and the U.S. presidential election. Are those primarily the things you're going to be looking toward when you're thinking about trying to prognosticate what's going to happen with U.S.-Japan relations going forward, or what will you be looking for in the next few months?
Well, right now, the reason I'm at Stanford is to write a book about the relationship between Silicon Valley and Japan. So today I did 2 interviews. I'm doing a number of interviews to try to gather information about ties between Silicon Valley and Japan. And to some extent, it's going to be historical, but a lot of it will be focused on the contemporary situation. So my primary focus right now is working on this book, and I'm hoping to finish the interviews by the end of summer and start writing in the fall and have a manuscript ready sometime next year. So that's my primary concern. But in terms of U.S.-Japan relations, I do think that, obviously, I'm watching what's happening in Japan and the Takaichi government and its future. But with regard to U.S.-Japan relations, obviously, watching what's happening between the U.S. and China is important, but also how the midterms go, and then how, which candidates and which issues are prominent as 2027, 2028 come up. Because I assume what's going to happen is that right after the November 3rd midterm elections, that from late this year and early next year, there will be a number of people who start to announce that their candidacy for the presidency. And in 2020, I recall there were altogether 28 candidates among the Democrats alone.
Right.
Not at any one time, but if you count all the candidates, there were 28. Mm-hmm. I don't expect there's going to be that many, but I think there'll be at least 10, maybe 15 people running on the Democratic side, and probably fewer, but still, quite a few on the Republican side. So clearly, it's going to take some time for things to sort themselves out. And usually I think the public opinion polls in January of the year of the election turn out to be wrong because,
Mm.
I remember 1992, I think Bill Clinton was number 4 among the Democratic candidates. And I think in 2016, Jeb Bush was considered to be the front runner among the Republicans. And in 2020, you will recall that I think Joe Biden had, in 2020, I think he came in number 4 in Iowa, number 5 in New Hampshire, lost Nevada. It wasn't until South Carolina that he finally won a primary.
Mm.
So it wasn't until like March, right? So until then, I don't think people felt he was the leading contender. And so, it's very difficult to predict, even as late as January of 2028, how things are going to go. So everybody will be watching very closely.
I see. Well, we certainly will be as well. And um, uh, it would be an honor to have you on again to discuss these matters as they unfold. In the meantime, want to wish you much success in your book writing and congratulations again on your position at Stanford. And just want to say thanks so much for being with us again today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thanks very much, Lefteris. I really enjoyed the discussion and wish you the best of luck in continuing in this program. Thank you.
Thank you very much.